Will. Good name.
So who sits on this committee? I'm just curious. I know David is a councillor. Are you all elected officials or?
No.
I'll let Will go. Will, you could do so.
So we have two elected officials. We have Dave and Maureen, and we have volunteers like myself, and Jeff Matheson and Michaela Florendo, and Don Schaefer. And then we have staff folks, Bonnie Brokenshire and Carlos Goose. And we have Daniel Martin, who is here as well. He's the planner, and he's going to be making some presentations to us as well.
And we got Patrick Graham, our engineer, who's going to be presenting on topic.
Oh, hi, Patrick. Sorry, I missed you. So shall I get started, Steph?
Sure.
Okay, thumbs up from Steph. So approval of the agenda.
Sure, I'll move that.
Okay, and seconded by Bonnie. I've got an addition to the agenda. Just looking at the past minutes, we decided to refer the review of the Green Building Standard policy to this meeting.
So
will we have time, Steph? We will not have time.
it's a big meeting, and then staff has an event after. So
Okay.
a chunk of this room has to see that.
Hopefully we can defer it to next time and drag Daniel in to talk about that too. Great.
Yeah.
So, in favor of passing the agenda?
Aye. Yeah.
Aye. Yes.
Carried. Adoption of the minutes.
Yeah.
Anybody, a motion, please?
Sure, I'll move it again.
David, seconded by
Maureen.
Maureen. In favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes.
Carried. Thanks, Jeff. Okay. Next page. Public comments, no public here. So delegations. So David, will you do the introductions, please?
Sure. So you'll hear a little bit about the Climate Caucus here, and it's an organization of elected officials who want to take some action on climate change, recognizing that there's lots of roles for municipality, but they're kind of left out of the loop to some degree. And the chair of the Climate Caucus, Jessica McElroy of North Van, asked me if Bowen Island would put its voice behind these 5 ideas that you're going to hear more about today. And so I said, sure, but that would have to go through this committee before it would go to council, because council would just, if I took it to council, they'd refer it here. So the quickest way was to refer it here. So you've seen the report on that, and a brief explanation of why and what the letter might look like. But Will is a councillor from the city of Courtenay. He's a director of the Comox Valley Regional District. He sits on the steering committee of Help Cities Lead and PACE BC, 2 organizations you'll hear more about in a moment. And he's a director of Climate Caucus. So he's involved in municipal affairs and all kinds of climate activities. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Will, and he will sort of explain what the ask is for us here. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for welcoming me here. And I'm just going to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. And so I guess I'll first maybe draw a bit of context. There are 2 letters to mayor and council that I've been part of a team that are sending out to local governments across BC. One is from Help Cities Lead, which is, excuse me, an initiative of Climate Caucus. And Help Cities Lead advocates 5 specific related policy changes that could help cities reduce the greenhouse gases related to buildings. One of those is to introduce something called PACE, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy. And as it happened, I was already sitting on the steering committee of PACE BC when I joined Help Cities Lead. So I've been involved in both. And as they're both involved in doing public outreach, we've tried to combine them. So there's a bit of overlap. PACE BC had its own well-developed campaign before Help Cities Lead started, and Help Cities Lead advocates 5 policy planks. One of them is PACE. So it's a bit of a complex background, but in the end, I'll hope that you're interested in supporting both Help Cities Lead with a resolution and letters to the appropriate ministers, and also in a separate endorsement of PACE specifically. I guess maybe I've got my own slides in front of me, so I'm not sure what slide we're on. But if are we currently on the first? Are we currently on the first slide, Steph?
Can you see it now?
I can.
Yes, I've got it now. Okay, thank you. Yes, and I'm good. Perfect. And still getting used to doing. Yeah. Okay. So perfect. So who we are? Help Cities Lead. Again, it's a collection of nonprofits and of local elected folks like myself and like Jessica, and we've had coordination with Climate Caucus to help us bring the message out. And so far, we have managed to get endorsement. I've spoken to other groups of councillors like yours, and we've had endorsement from, let me think, Powell River, Fernie, Kitimat, Courtenay, Nanaimo, Port Moody, Highlands, and I'm thinking there's one other on the list, and we've got about a dozen or so other municipalities in the next week or so where Help Cities Lead and PACE are coming on the agenda. And the idea, of course, is to try and get letters of support generated, which will help us lobby the provincial government to make the changes we're looking for. And I should say that thank you, that's exactly what I was going to suggest. British Columbia's local governments are on the front lines, as you probably know, of climate change. A large part of the greenhouse gas emissions from a given area can be controlled by local government policy. But it would still be helpful for us to have slightly more authority, particularly over buildings. If you can move to the next slide. Discussing buildings are responsible for a large part of greenhouse gas emissions for local governments. In most cases, they are the largest single contributor to greenhouse gas emissions from local governments. And if you could move to the next one, please. All right. And so currently, due to, as we all know, local governments are creatures of the province. The province has created us, and it gives us certain powers. And there are a number of limitations on the actions that local governments can take. And those limitations can only really be alleviated by the province, giving us greater action, greater authority to act. You can see it's kind of a stoplight here, chart here. And we really have full authority only in the area of information campaigns, then the STEP code. But as you probably know, the STEP code does not measure greenhouse gases. It's so GHGs are not a part of that, and that's something we'll be talking about in a second. So these are some of the areas where there's limited and or no authority for local governments. So if you move to the next slide, you'll see that the targets where we would like to be and where the province would like us to be are considerably deeper in terms of reductions than what we're currently able to generate with the business as usual track. As you can see, there's a slight decline in building GHG emissions, but not the deep declines that are required by in terms of the target set by the provincial government. If we go to the next slide. So there are 5 key policy tools that Help City Lead is advocating for. The first one is PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing. And as I mentioned, I'm also on the steering committee of PACE BC, and that's a singular target of PACE BC is to get province-wide enabling legislation for PACE financing. And there's also mandatory home energy labeling, building energy benchmarking, and regulating climate pollution for new buildings and for existing buildings. So those are the 5 asks that PACE has. Those are the 5 interlocking policy planks that help cities lead would like to see local governments have the authority to enact if they so choose. So just kind of go through those one by one. The first is PACE. And I'm going to ask, is there, just by a show of hands, how many people are familiar with PACE? Is this an acronym that's familiar to people? Okay, fair. That's PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And essentially what it is a way of, if it's enacted, is a way of borrowing against the value of your home from your municipality, through your municipality, and you would repay this loan on through your property taxes each year. And it would be for a set prescribed number of possible upgrades, like retrofits for increasing energy efficiency and for green energy installs like solar or wind. And the objective there is to have a PACE enabling legislation, which we put in place by the province, which would allow municipalities to decide to offer PACE to the people in their community. PACE, and it would allow a simple process administered by the province by which people could find a contractor, sign up for a specified series of home energy efficiency upgrades, and over the course of the loan would be repayable over a significant period of time, allowing the savings in energy each year to provide the funds you need to repay the loan. So in the end, each year it would be a wash. You'd be saving as much or more on your energy bills as you're paying to repay the loan. And at the end of the loan period, you would have a warmer house, a more valuable home, and you would not be behind at all financially. You would actually be coming out ahead. And in the United States, there are a number of states which have PACE programs. And one of the things that's worth thinking about is not only are PACE programs great for kickstarting retrofits and green energy installs, but they're also a huge job generator. And that's something to think about as we all recover from COVID and we try to keep our economies going, is that in the United States, over $16.5 billion in projects were funded through PACE and over 180,000 jobs created. And I would just say that there's a lot of support for this on the industry side, both in terms of producers, like there's a solar energy installer in our community that contacted me because they wanted to get behind PACE and support it because they saw it as a great driver of the work that they're doing and a way for them to be expanding the work they're doing in our community with clean energy installs. And it's also something which building owners are in support of. One of my colleagues on the steering committee was the government affairs representative for the Building Owners and Managers Association of British Columbia. So folks who own buildings commercially see this as a net win as well. And there's been quite a lot of support for PACE. As you can see, there are UBCM resolutions 2014, 2016, 2017, 2019. Of course, PACE BC is working hard on this in terms of, and the work that PACE BC did manage to get PACE into the platform of the government. And when they were reelected, or actually even before being reelected, they put $2 million into supporting a comprehensive study of PACE programs. And as part of PACE BC, we were very fortunate to have the assistance of Don Lidstone, who's probably the most senior local government lawyer in the province, to draft the necessary enabling legislation. He's now working on retainer for the provincial government to do the same thing. And it's also in what we call the ministerial mandate letters, the letters that the government provides to each minister to set the objectives for the work that they do. And both, should list 2 ministries there, and I see there's only one. It's in the mandate letters of both energy mines and low carbon infrastructure, and also the mandate letter of municipal affairs. So it's something which the government would like to see implemented, and part of what we're saying as Help Cities Lead is we fully support the efforts of the government to put in place enabling legislation which would allow municipalities, if and when they wish to adopt PACE. Next would be mandatory home energy labeling. This is a critical tool for homeowners in terms of when you're buying something, you want to have a clear understanding of the energy efficiency of the building that you have. And you can see how that type of labeling would incentivize people to make their homes as efficient as possible so they stand up well. It would also mean if they'd say taken out a PACE loan and made those kinds of upgrades in efficiency, it would allow them to realize that value when they sell their home, for the buyer to see the work that had been done and the value that they would be receiving in terms of lower energy bills. And this is also in a mandate letter. This is in the mandate letter of First Lady Robinson, the Minister of Finance, and her mandate letter asks her to require realtors to provide energy efficiency information on listed homes. This and third leg of the Help Cities Lead initiatives, and this is also supported in the existing mandate letters, is regulating climate pollution for new buildings. As you probably know, there is a STEP code, but the STEP code does not incorporate greenhouse gases into its metrics. And the idea here would be to allow local governments to set their own carbon pollution performance standards for new buildings. And again, this would be if and when they choose to. If this fit with the climate plan that you had, then we would like to see your local government have the authority to take that action if it so chose. So those first three elements of PACE are all included in mandate letters to ministers, and we support those. And there are two other elements of Help Cities Lead which are not included in mandate letters, and we are advocating for. These are again tools which we'd like to see you have in the toolbox. Doesn't mean you have to use them, but they will be available if you wish to in order to drive greenhouse gas reductions. Building energy benchmarking. This would provide data on existing building performance and help direct policy and programs. As we've often said in local government, it's hard to manage things that you can't measure. And this is trying to put the measuring into it so that local governments can respond to the and track the progress that they're making. Next would be regulating climate pollution for existing buildings. And again, this is an authority we would like to see local governments have, but there would be no specific requirements that you act upon that. And UBCM, Special Advisor on Climate Action, supported this action. The City of Vancouver, because of the Vancouver Charter, is in a position to do this, but it's not something that other communities have the current authority to do. And sorry, I realize I haven't been saying next at all because I've been looking at my own slides. If we go next, and this gives you an idea of the power of these 5 policy pieces if they are implemented. And if you look at the very bottom line, that is the line that we would need to be hitting if we want to hit the target set by the provincial government. Yellow is business as usual if we don't adopt any of the elements of Help Cities Lead, and green is the line which we would achieve if all of them were implemented. And as you can see, that takes us a considerable distance towards the goal that's required. Not all the way there, but a considerable distance. And there's obviously a breakdown of just what different combinations of policy, how much of a reduction can be modeled from that. So if we can move to the next slide. So what we're looking for are endorsements from local governments. We'd like to ask you to support the work that we're doing and endorse it, and again, send those letters to ministers. But it's also important to make it clear that endorsing it doesn't mean your local government has to act on any of these things. You're just advocating in favor of local governments having the authority to act here. And if we go to the next slide. So what we'd like to do again is for you, your local government to support it and write the letter to the relevant ministers expressing support for the directions in the mandate letters on the first three elements, PACE financing, home energy labeling, and GHG requirements for new buildings. And second, to request that the province empower local governments to opt to take action, if they choose, on the remaining elements, which are GHG requirements for existing buildings and building energy benchmarking. And I should say that both the letter to Mayor and Council, which I would like to submit to Bowen Island for PACE, and the one for Help Cities Lead, each of them contains a sample resolution setting out exactly what you're seeing here, and also a sample letter to ministers. So if you decide to support us, you decide to pass the resolution, then a sample letter to the ministers is also included in the package. And I'll just ask you to go to the next screen. And if you go to Help Cities Lead, all of these resources are available to support you. There's a lot of information on the website, including detailed briefing notes on each of the 5 elements I've just gone through, and one on the combined impact. There's a sample report to council if you would like to bring it to your council that way. There was this slide deck that we've just been using here, and yet another copy of the draft letter to ministers. And if you move to the next slide, so the next steps for us are continuing to acquire local government endorsements. As I said, we've already had them from Nanaimo, North Vancouver, Powell River, Kitimat, Fernie, Highlands, Oak Bay, Port Moody, Summerland, and Courtenay. And another dozen or so local governments have it on their agenda with a strong advocate willing to speak for it over the next few weeks. A resolution for UBCM was passed by the City of Courtenay on Monday, and one will be passed coming up by the District of North Vancouver in the LGA. So this resolution, which we're kind enough to have the support of Dodd Lidstone in drafting that for us, will be going forward to ABICC and LMLGA and hopefully make it to the floor at UBCM. We also have a meeting booked with David Evie, who's the Attorney General and Minister responsible for housing. Jessica McElroy and I will be meeting with him on March 9th. And members of the steering committee of Help Cities Lead are also working now on meetings with key senior staff. So that's kind of an overview of the campaign, and I'd be happy to answer questions. One caveat I should give is there are a lot of skilled people on the Help Cities Lead steering committee. I'm the one who has the most knowledge on how to try and move this forward politically with local governments. There are others who are more subject matter experts. So if there are questions that you have that I don't have the technical expertise to answer, I'll endeavor to get you questions, hopefully by noon. One of the strong technical people who did the modeling said he would be available for me to email if I had any questions. But anyway, if you want to move to the final question, it's just the final slide. It's just got the address for our website. And if there are any questions, I've gone through quite a lot quite quickly, so please, I'll do my best to answer them.
Well, I'll start. I'll just say, Will, this is a very exciting initiative, and I don't know if I can speak for the whole committee, but I think this is a wonderful thing for Bowen Island to be involved in. So you've got lots of support, at least from me as chair. I think there'd be lots of questions about the nuts and bolts of some of these initiatives, but I think we understand the broad picture. So thank you.
Okay.
And any questions from other members? Maureen.
Yeah, and thanks very much, Bill. That was a very thorough presentation. I appreciate it. With the communities that you've presented to, have any of those communities chose not to endorse your presentation?
No, we've had endorsements from every community. I think Whistler referred it to staff for a staff report.
Right.
But besides that, every community who we've spoken to has endorsed it.
Right. That would be my inclination as well, that this be referred to staff for comment, because there are very significant implications in terms of what we'll refer to as nuts and bolts, but just the implementation of any of these ideas. And in small communities in particular, we can be challenged to bring things into fruition that might be possible in larger communities with greater ease. And then my other question actually is for David, and it has to do with the Metro Vancouver home labeling project. When I was the Metro director, there was work being done on that, and I haven't heard anything further. Do you know if Metro proceeded with the home labeling project?
Metro's talked about it. It's in the, so for the Climate 2050 plan, they're divided up into chunks, and there's a whole chunk on buildings. The roadmap on buildings will be coming out, I think, before this summer, and presumably it will be in there because it's been discussed a whole lot, as are a few of these sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay.
The issue around the step code, that it doesn't measure emissions, it's about energy but not emissions, and some of the other points that Will has mentioned. Yeah.
And then just one last question. It goes back, Will, to your presentation. You described the PACE program as cumbersome. So is the proposed direction of having the provincial government take on a larger role, is that in part to deal with the cumbersome?
Exactly. As it currently stands, you can, through local area initiatives, there's a means of building a PACE program yourself, and that's what City of Saanich is doing. And it's logistically quite complicated to build the entire structure yourself, and that's why that's the only community in British Columbia to do so. What has been successful in the United States, and the people at PACE BC who I've been working with have been working with folks who have been involved in design of programs in the United States. And we've also obviously been working with Don Lidstone, who wrote the Local Government Act, to draft enabling legislation that would fit with what we have here. What's worked well in the US is to have a single third-party administrator, so that the structure is set for local governments. They simply need to opt into it, and then the staff hours would be involved simply in connecting individual residents to the overall program, and then remitting the funds on property taxes each year. But in the US states, where it's been driven those billions of dollars of retrofits and created those tens of thousands of jobs, that's what's been allowed them to do. That is, rather than asking each government, large and small, to reinvent the wheel, they've said, look, we've got a whole stack of wheels if anyone needs one. And people said yes. So it's that's what has driven the success of PACE in the United States, is when a large government has done the heavy lifting on behalf, administratively, on behalf of individual communities who can then adopt it as kind of a plug and play program.
Okay, thank you.
Bonnie, I think you're next.
Thanks. Well, I'm just coming from a staff perspective, and again, too, the PACE program seems great, but logistically, just you've spoken to that. Inventing that, like, I just think of the finance people and just the staffing resources involved in administering the program and developing the structure. So I guess that was my question, is I'd really like to, if I was going to write a staff report and present it to council, like I would have to be realistic on what staffing resources would be, financial and staffing resources would be involved. Was it Saanich you said that's developing this?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, that would be really interesting. Also, maybe a model on how that came about, like the details of the model from one of the programs in the States.
Well,
And maybe you did touch upon also, I just have a question here, is you're lobbying the province, because if we did, the success in the States is the bigger levels, higher levels of government. So so you are in tandem with going to the smaller, to our local governments, lobbying the province to maybe set up something that would enable local governments, because right now with our staffing resources, I just, I would love to support it, but realistically bringing it to life would be challenging.
I fully agree, and as a councillor, and I well understand the staff limitations, and I know I would never expect our staff to be able to construct it from scratch. And that is and again, that's been the main barrier to implementation is people. There just simply isn't the capacity in most communities to build a program like this. I would suggest, in terms of resources, two things to do. One would be to, if you go to helpcitieslead.ca, there's a resources page, and on the resources page there are it's like sort of 4 or 5 page briefing note for each of these policies, including PACE. There's also Maddie Kennedy from the Pembina Institute sits on both PACE and Help Cities Lead Steering Committee with me, and she wrote a 30-page briefing note on PACE, looking at the US models and the efficiencies that are being gained there. So if you gave me your email, actually, I'll see if I'll quickly find those, and I can just drop those into the chat. That's probably the easiest way to get you that information. And I'm trying to remember, was there a third part? Have I answered the parts of your question?
I think you did in your presentation, just about lobbying the province and maybe where that's going, or the receptivity of the province.
Right. So our goal here is to lobby the province. We're coming to local governments because the more support we can show that there is from local government, the more interest there is, the easier it will be to lobby the ministers to come to an acceptance of that. And the reason I'm just going to drop this is the Pembina Institute report on PACE, and the other briefing information is all on helpcitieslead.ca. There's like a 6-page briefing note, which puts together the effects of all 5 arms, and then there's an individual briefing note for each one, including PACE. So we are lobbying the provincial government. That's why we're asking you to express support by writing to the provincial government. That's why we're meeting with Dave Beebe.
That's great. Yeah, and I just want to ask, are any other provinces in Canada, have they advanced any similar programs?
There's no province which has the kind of the provincial third-party enabling legislation that we're advocating here. You see that model in the US. There are more limited versions in other provinces, but the idea of having a third-party centralized administrator is not something that's being tried here. And
so, David, before you go, David, I might have seen a flicker of a hand from Michaela. No, okay, sorry. David, go ahead.
Sure, I've got some overall comments, but just one detailed question regarding PACE. So in my understanding of PACE, there's funds available through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities that the as the program is developed, so that the municipality itself wouldn't bear the burden of losing tax revenues. That's correct. Am I right, Will?
If the funds available from FCM require having some sort of PACE program in place. So if we were to have a provincial enabling legislation, then those funds would be available to backstop. Absolutely.
Yeah,
right. If we were to adopt PACE enabling legislation, then that would open up access to that large body of funding from FCM.
Exactly. Good. Okay. The other point I want to make is that it's important here that, first of all, the material that Will is speaking of, I've written a report. Actually, I edited and pulled a report from all the material that Will's talking about. I've written letters to the ministers, and it's written in quotation marks. I've edited the letters that Will has. So and the briefing notes on every one of these, that's in your package already. I've included that. So all that information is there for you. But what's really important here is we're not asking, if this goes to council, it's not asking council to do this stuff. It's asking council to ask the BC province to allow this to happen and put the mechanisms in place so that if we should want to do it or have the resources to do it, we can do these things. But it's very important. We're not asking staff, we're not asking our very busy staff and our municipality with small resources to get going on all this stuff. We're asking them simply to lobby the BC government to allow municipalities across British Columbia, except for Vancouver, which already can do whatever the heck it wants. Okay, so that's what this is.
Yeah, and David, that's a really important point. I try to make that clear, but I think it's understandably at the time we're at right now with post-COVID, everyone's overstretched.
Yeah.
No one's staff has the time to, I think, be committing too much to this. If you were to pass the resolution, all it does, as you said, is express support for municipalities having these tools in the toolbox. You're welcome to leave them if they don't fit your needs at any given time. That's fine. You don't need to do any of the things. If you pass our resolution, all you'd be committing to doing is writing a couple of letters.
Yeah.
And then if we're successful, then it would mean you have these options in the future if you wish to adopt them. There'd be no requirement to do anything in particular.
Yeah. And as I said, I've got a couple of letters that you can have a look at, although we don't need to go into the details now. And I've also written a resolution that's in that report that we could look at and see if we like that resolution. So that's it for me.
And any more questions? I'll ask Jeff, who I can't see. So if he's got any questions.
Thanks, Will. No, David's question and the discussion about that answered my question is about, is there really any need to put this to staff at the present time? So thanks.
Great. So I guess now, David, you have a resolution. Can you read that? You're muted at the moment.
On the screen. Sorry, just give me a sec I'll do a share screen. That's okay.
Good, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, there it is. The ECAAC recommend that Bowen Island Municipality write to the BC Ministers of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, Municipal Affairs, Finance, Housing and Energy Mines and Low Carbon Innovation to request that the BC government give local governments the ability to use the following policy tools, and I've numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, from benchmarking and so on. Don't need to repeat.
That seems really clear to me. Do any members of the committee have comments or suggestions?
Yes, I do. Well,
go ahead, Maureen.
I suspect when this goes to council, that council is going to refer it to staff. I don't see this getting approved right off the bat. So my question has to do with the time sensitivity of this. I understand that there are some meetings, as Will mentioned, coming up in March, but this is a big ask, and I really would like there to be some time to digest it.
It's okay if I just respond. You were asking about the time sensitivity. It would be wonderful if you were in a position to express support before our meeting with David Eby, but that's not going to be the last meeting. We plan to meet with each of the ministers on this list, and we will continue gathering resolutions of support. For me, it's like a part-time job. I do this about 15 hours a week, and I'll keep doing it until I've spoken to every municipality in the province. But every I don't want anyone to rush a decision or feel they're not ready for it. So please don't feel a time pressure from our end. So whatever process is appropriate, take it and make sure that you feel good about the decision you've made at the end. And we'll appreciate your support if you're able to provide it at the end. So no rush from us.
Personally, I would be prepared to support this, but some of the language here, some of the programs would be new considerations for some members of our council. And I think pushing them too quickly, too fast, would be to our disadvantage. Whereas if we gave them a little bit more time to become accustomed to what's being proposed here, we would have a greater degree of buy-in on the part of both staff and council. So those are my feelings, David.
So Maureen, what we could do then, just leave it on a bit, please, Steph, is
Okay.
that we insert in here, I recommend that, how could we insert some words that recommend that BIM consider writing to the BC Minister of Energy, blah, 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 and request staff's analysis or opinion or thoughts or something like that. Something like that, Maureen?
Yeah, I'm more comfortable with that.
So Steph, if you can you edit? Oh, there we go, yes. And request that staff review these proposed policies and offer recommendations, something like that.
Did Don have his hand up?
Sorry, what's that?
I think Don had his hand up. Don, did you want to say something before this gets crafted?
I can't see Don, so
Don, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Don, do you want to write your note in the chat? Okay. Sorry for interrupting, Councillor.
Might I suggest that somewhere in the resolution, it might be useful to just mention Help Cities Lead, just so people know where all the information on these 5 points is to be found, and just that's the particular campaign that's coming to you asking for the support.
So helps.
It could go at the top. That BIM consider supporting the Help Cities Lead with a link in it.
Perfect. That would be ideal. Thank you.
By writing.
By writing, yeah.
That gives enough waffle and it gives enough space for staff to express their perspective.
Oh, I see we got Dawn into the chat. Let's have a look. Whoops, I just lost it. What did I do? Dawn says, I'm familiar with the project, think this is an important project, happy to help where necessary. Okay, great. Thanks, Dawn.
thank you, Don.
So
Any more discussion?
I'll move the motion.
Okay, and I'll second. Well, we shouldn't have two councillors. Somebody else seconded it.
Second by Jeff.
Okay, seconded by Jeff. All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
I
Aye.
can't see
Michaela.
the way the screen's set up. I can't see how many people are voting.
I can, and we've got them all. Michaela.
Okay, so it looks like it's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Passed.
Yeah, and thanks so much for spending all the time on this, Will. We really appreciate
Yes,
both
yes,
Will.
that was a great presentation, Will, and a great project.
That's kind of you to say so. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your meeting space with me. I'll probably get back to a few other things here and wish you all a great morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Will.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Any chance
Okay.
my microphone's working now?
Oh, welcome back.
Okay,
Oh,
Michaela, you've effectively abstained because you weren't here for the vote, but that turns out as a vote in the affirmative, if that's okay with you. Yay.
okay. So next one,
So we
is new business.
we've got Daniel Martin, the manager of planning and development, and Patrick.
Welcome, Daniel and Patrick. So, Daniel, do you have a presentation?
I do, and before I start, I was going to ask, it's the presentation that's it's largely the same as I presented to council, so I'm happy to give the same presentation, or if you've reviewed it, I'm happy to sort of skip over it and give a quicker condensed version of it, but I'm open for what you would like, how in depth you want the presentation to be.
Committee
I think it'd
comments?
be helpful to go through it, Daniel. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to. I'm just conscious of your time, so.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel.
Just start. All right, does that come through okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is work that the planning department did at the request of council, looking at what we were calling development potential on Bowen Island. So what we were looking at specifically was development that may occur on Bowen Island without further council approval. So this didn't look at things like where our OCP designates additional growth that would require rezoning, but it just looked at if council just goes away and doesn't approve any additional development, what could still take place. And we looked specifically at three sources. So we looked at vacant residential properties. We looked at lots within some of our standard rural and settlement residential zones that could be subdivided under the current zoning. And finally, we looked at what are called comprehensive development zones. So these are typically like designated developments that got rezoned at some point, and which ones have remaining units within those CD zones. I have a number of caveats in this presentation, but so one is staff are aware that there are gaps and omissions in all the data sources. So I don't want the numbers to be taken as this is the gospel number, but it's to give an idea of sort of the range and scope of what is outstanding. The development potential is not a population projection. So it doesn't say it will be this many people because it doesn't give any sort of timing of when things will be developed. And then on Bowen, we've seen other things impact, population numbers beyond just development. So it can be the number of households or number of people that are in a household. As that changes your population projection. And on Bowen, we see a big impact of, how many houses are occupied by usual residents as opposed to vacation resident or part-time owners. Again, has a big impact on our population. And then the final caveat is just that development potential doesn't mean that the lots that I show will be developed in any immediacy. It's hard to tell. So when I look at the vacant lots, some of them are newly created vacant lots that are shortly to be under construction, and some were created in the subdivision in 1920s and have never been developed. So there's a big range there. But so when I looked at the vacant properties, what we took is BC assessment data that was released January 1st, 2021. Their data then comes from July of 2020, so it's 6 months old. And we filtered it to show what were vacant lots, and then excluded the lots that they called civic or utility lots. Linked it to our existing GIS data, and then I manually went through and excluded lots without residential potential. So BC assessment had flagged things like municipal parks that we hold that are still designated residential by BC assessment. Strata common properties, some crown land parcels were flagged as well. So there may still be a few of those remnants existing in the mapping, but I took out a lot of them. And then I manually reviewed approximately 50 of the parcels to confirm that what was showing up in my mapping was matching what I knew existed on the ground. But so what we identified was approximately 300 properties on Bowen that are residential and are vacant that could proceed with a building permit application. I didn't do any evaluation on other aspects of development, such as septic potential or access routes or environmental considerations, but just that they're zoned residential, they're vacant, so they could theoretically be developed. I didn't consider underdeveloped properties. So for example, in Snug Cove, there's properties where the zoning allows for denser development. So somebody could, in theory, purchase a property and redevelop it at higher density, and that wasn't included in this. And then I did a breakdown by the municipal water systems to assist in some of the aquifer planning that has been underway in those water systems. So this is the overall legend. So 320 vacant properties, 50 of which are within the Cove Bay water system. for some sense. You see that 18 in Hood Point vacant, sort of in the teens generally for our different water systems. And then this is the map of that overall vacant lots. So you see a big range from large lots that have sat vacant for a number of years to recent ones that were recently subdivided. Next, then I looked at subdivision potential. So I looked at large properties that are zoned, have either our rural residential zoning or a settlement residential zoning, and compared the size of the property with the size requirements in the land use bylaw. And so I just looked at that simpler math of, if the zoning requires a 1 hectare minimum lot size and it's a 10-acre lot, I would say, or 10-hectare lot, I would say, okay, you can turn that 1 lot into 10 lots. You have 9 additional lots. And that's what I would calculate. I didn't consider other aspects that would be considered at time of subdivision. So things like, we consider access routes or servicing or environmental and geotechnical considerations, all of which sometimes in Bowen means that while the zoning may say you could get X number of lots out of development, in fact, the practical maximum is less than that. So my big caveat is not every lot identified on this map will be able to be subdivided. I also didn't consider that there's some funny things in our zoning where additional lots could be created through, for example, combining multiple lots. So it may be that your lot is too small to be subdivided into 2 lots and your neighbor's lot is too small to be subdivided into 2 lots, but potentially the 2 of you could partner and you could create 3 lots out of your 2 lots and create an additional lot. Our zoning also has provisions where it allows for denser development if you're part of a community water system than if you're not. So there's some cases where it would theoretically be possible for somebody to establish a community water system and go through the regulatory burdens from Vancouver Coastal Health, and that would enable additional subdivision. But with those in mind, I identified over 200 lots that could be created through subdivision without requiring a rezoning. I'll go to the map after this one. But so next I looked at our comprehensive development zones. So 8 existing comprehensive development zones to identify what development is remaining within those zones. And some of the timing of this gets a little funny in that I identified some CD zones of having active subdivisions. So in Arbutus Ridge in Parkview Slopes, which is up Rivendell Drive, and in Cowan Point show as active in this, even though they were completed in December, but that's because they don't appear in the BC assessment vacancy data from July. So I'm flagging them here as active, even though they've been created since, they're currently created. So the developers wouldn't consider them active subdivisions because they exist, but they don't show up in the vacant category. And then just when I mapped it, I mapped the entire CD zone just for illustrative purposes. So even though within the CD zone, some of the area may be designated as park, or like in Cowan Point, it shows the golf course, or Grafton Lake, a large amount of the area shown is to be park, and it's not where the development's taking place. It's just there on the map. And then for the CD zone lots and even the subdivision lots, they also, if they're vacant, they'll appear on the vacant property lot as well as in the CD mapping. So it's not as simple as just adding the vacant properties and the CD lots and saying, okay, did this many lots created, because there's some double counting between the 2 maps. But in essence, when looking at, so the Evergreen development, Arbutus Ridge, Grafton Lake, Cowan Point, the 2 CD zones for the community land, so lot 1 and lot 2, the pub comprehensive development zone, and the remaining area on Parkview Slopes, we identified 387 remaining dwellings that could be permitted. Next, then we looked at, just as a final piece, looking at what type of dwellings are being permitted in these CD zones. So are they detached? Are they attached? What are they exactly, breaking down what type of housing would be created? So we see, like in the Grafton Lake development has the largest number of remaining dwellings. And the zoning actually permits them to be attached or detached. And 35 of them would be under an affordable housing agreement. Same with the Arbutus Ridge development, has 50 dwellings remaining, 36 of which would be detached dwellings, and 14 of them would be detached but under terms of a housing agreement. So what we saw in this, of that 300 odd dwellings remaining in CD zones, it's almost half of them could be essentially the zoning allows from either to be detached or attached, and 58 of them would be specified to be attached dwellings. I'll note that, and 49 of them, sorry, 49 to be developed under terms of a housing agreement. Of the either category, I would expect that the majority of these to be developed as detached dwellings. So we see the Cowan Point CD zone has some areas that allow for this either. They can be detached or attached dwellings. And to date, all of the ones in that category have been developed as detached dwellings. And I would expect that's what we would see development to continue, but the option does remain for the developer. So this then is the second map showing subdivision potential, the lots in yellow, and then the lots in pink are those CD zones that have development outstanding. And that would be the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions or any discussion on that presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. Any questions from committee members?
Just
Maureen.
a comment. I get very excited when this report was presented at council. I think it fills in a lot of gaps in our knowledge base of the baseline for Bowen, what's already baked into the system. I think it highlights the type of housing that we are likely to end up with if we continue sort of business as usual. And I think it goes to some of the questions that have been raised in this committee around the capacity of the island and where we might run up against some real challenges. And I was really grateful to see that it proceeded apace with the aquifer work that Patrick has been undertaking. So I'm really interested to hear from other members of the committee on this.
I've got a question for Daniel about the official community plan. I didn't see any reference to that in your report. So how does this reflect the carrying capacity identified by the official community plan? Does it fit, or does this exceed what the official community plan was talking about?
Yeah, I mean, so that was one piece that I specifically almost didn't consider in this, and that the OCP, the Schedule C, I believe, is the present and future land use designations. And so it would designate areas that could potentially have more growth potential than the current zoning. And so I didn't consider that because each of those, so for a property owner who has a lot that for example, the zoning is a 4 hectare, so a 10-acre minimum lot size currently in the land use bylaw, and the OCP says, well, they could actually be 2.5-acre lots, say. So the owner may say, okay, in the OCP, I would be 4 lots where I'm 1 right now, is that would require a rezoning application for council to consider. And I always sort of caution people, I say, well, the OCP map says the future use would be, could potentially be higher density, but it's up for council to determine, like, is the future today, or is the future still 5 or 10 years out? So this was specifically trying to provide council and committee members what could happen now without council, without going to that next step of matching, land use to the OCP level. Does that make sense?
Sure. How do you see this data meeting? How do you see this data being used in the future?
I mean, I think one of the takeaways we took immediately as staff was just looking at the vacant properties within some of the water systems. So as we're looking at the aquifer planning, we know how many connections there are, and we know where the growth potential could be but then looking at, okay, but there's actually sort of this hidden growth potential within them where there's these lots that may have been vacant the whole life of the water system, but we need to account for them because suddenly 5 of them could come on board. And if the water system is, been planned for a certain capacity and now there's more that is unthought of. So that was sort of the main initial takeaway that I took.
I was wondering about things like development of infrastructure like roads, how this would influence development of the Trans-Island Pathway and that kind of thing. We're often talking in this committee about how are we going to reduce vehicle use on Bowen, so how, can this data be used for, to understand better how we can meet those goals? The idea of concentrating human use in nodes like Snug Cove and that kind of thing.
I think in that sense, its usefulness then is when in evaluating new applications for additional, so somebody else coming for rezoning, and we may be saying, well, it looks like we have lots of potential already for detached dwellings, so maybe then the focus is more on saying, but we want to see some more attached, or we want to see, so like I could see it used that way.
Okay, I saw David's hand up first, then Bonnie.
Yeah, this is also, it's a good question, Will. And so this is also being referred to the Transportation Advisory Committee for them to have a look at. But as Daniel's pointed out, it's tricky because some of these lots have been sitting there for nearly 100 years. And, we don't know if they'll ever be used or not. There's significant development potential in a bunch of areas that might help or hinder some of the transportation issues that you mentioned. But so BIMTAC will have a look at it and see if there's something to come out of that. But it's a good thought. Thanks, Will.
Bonnie?
Thanks, Daniel. The one thing that came to mind to me was that BC Ferries should see the information. But also too, for me, what's striking is, just everything that we've been talking about as a committee, and I'm sure, our concerns and what's come up in our consultation and stakeholder sessions in the updating of the SEEP and the original SEEP as well. And that is, the urgency of looking at how we curtail emissions from buildings. And this morning's presentation fit nicely into that. I've heard, regulating size of detached buildings, looking at sustainable building products, and also, the urgency of promoting clean transportation options for sure. So as well, I think just with the development and everything that goes along with that, people wanting to remove native vegetation and put lawns in and all that, like there's the huge education component with that. And also just the fact that when you have a house and we've got fire smart and we've got changing climate, that we will get more and more tree canopy loss. And which could then in turn, again, the cycle aggravate climate change or local climate conditions even more. So I think just all the stuff we've been talking about, that it just, for me, it lights the fire, it presents that urgency of it all, right? It's just everything's connected. So just that's what really struck home for me.
Any other comments? Jeff, do you have any comments or questions?
No, Will, I don't. Thanks. Nothing further,
Okay.
except that great piece of information.
Yeah. And Don?
No, thank you.
Okay. And Michaela? Okay. So I thank you, Daniel. I hope we gave you some input there that's helpful. Is there
Sorry, Will, I've just got someone in the waiting room, Tom Burcott,
okay?
maybe a member of the public coming. I'm gonna let them in. That's
Okay.
It's never happened to me before.
Hello, Tom Burcott. Welcome.
Hello. I'll just kind of mute and put. I'm just here to back Will up if there's any questions on the Help Cities Lead part.
Okay.
Does that work? I can, or
Yeah.
I basically, I was the consultant that worked on the Help Cities Lead project with Will and others. And so,
Great. Well, Will's done his presentation, and it was well received. Lots of questions. We're going to be moving forward on it. So your work here might be done.
wow, that was the easiest call ever. All right, thanks. All right, thanks
Thank you.
everyone.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, yeah,
Thanks,
take care.
Thanks
Bye.
for dropping in.
Okay.
So, Daniel, what do you need from our committee?
It was just referred by council for information, so I don't need.
Yeah.
So your feedback is great, and then I think Council Moore wanted to know that you had the discussion and you're aware of the information and with staff. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. And Maureen and David, do you need anything further from us at the moment?
Nope.
No, thanks. All good.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we go to the water now.
So we had Patrick the whole time, and now we've lost him.
Oh, I see him,
Yeah,
but he's muted.
You can't, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. That's
Can you
right.
hear me?
Yeah.
So what was attached to the agenda was a lot of information relating to the water system improvement projects. So I've pulled some of the information together that relates more to the resource management aspect, which I gather this group would be most interested in. So I'll share my screen and hopefully that'll work out. Okay.
There it is.
Can you see it? Okay. So the Bowen Island Municipal Water Systems, there's 7 of them. We've called it the Improvement Project because it relates to many aspects of several different systems. Primary focus is on closing the gap between, the expected level of service that everyone on municipal systems should have. It's an essential service, and there are gaps between that expected level and the actual level, especially in the Eagle Cliff and Blue Water systems. Also, there's some needs in other systems as well. So the phase 1 work that we've been engaged in since last fall, and we're just in the process of meeting with the local air advisory committees for the relevant water systems. The focus there is on the resource management and the infrastructure improvement aspects. And then in the next phases, we're going to be getting into, designing the improvements in more details, but also developing the finance and governance aspect of the solutions. As part of the work that's been ongoing, we've done some water source sustainability assessments for a couple of our most important water sources, Grafton Lake, and what we're calling the West Side Aquifer, which is essentially the west side of Mount Gardner, extending from, the whole aquifer extends from, is it Galbraith Bay or down to Bowen Bay, but it's really the south end of that aquifer that is such an important water source for us. And we are working towards an island-wide water master plan. These are pieces of that will, eventually come together in that way. So just a quick look at our municipal surface water, and recognizing the island-wide master plan would have to look at all the other non-municipal systems and demands and sources, and we're focusing here on the municipal systems and our responsibility to those. So in terms of surface water, we have a couple of very good water sources in Grafton Lake and Honeymoon Lake. I've just shown here the number of connections as single family equivalents for Cove Bay because we have some commercial and institutional there. And just sort of some metrics to compare watershed area per connection and storage volume per connection. We've got some very good ratios for Grafton Lake and Honeymoon Lake. And then Eagle Cliff is is a lot lower. And, you know, the 91 cubic meters per connection, that's assuming the reservoir holds water, which of course it doesn't. And then we have our groundwater sources. What I've mentioned, the west side aquifer, and given the problems, the supply issues in blue water, we've since last spring had an aquifer monitoring program and assessment by a professional hydrogeologist looking at, you know, the how the system could be optimized, but also just as importantly, what, you know, the annual yield that we can expect for the current well recharge areas, and that's looking at long-term projections for climate change as well, and how that might affect that supply, and comparing that with our existing and future demands. In terms of future demands, it was a matter of working with Daniel and our consultants and coming up with assumptions for reasonable or expected future scenarios. It doesn't necessarily encompass everything that could possibly happen, which is some of what Daniel was presenting. In the Tunstall Bay Aquifer, there hasn't been signs of stress on that. It's on the other side of Explosives Creek, so it does sort of function hydrogeologically separately, and we will be looking into that this year. So one of the drivers for the water system improvement project is the problems, the lack of a reliable supply, water quality issues as well in Eagle Cliff. And the preferred solution is with our new state-of-the-art Cove Bay water treatment plant coming online within the next couple of months. Having that treatment facility and Grafton Lake supplying Eagle Cliff is the best bet. And then there's also a number of properties, the properties that aren't shaded blue there, that are not part of any water system and are on wells, and many of those properties we do know are having significant challenges with their wells, and would, you know, welcome the opportunity to connect to a municipal system. So when looking at Grafton Lake water use scenarios, we've considered and done some modeling with our help of our consultant team from Urban Systems, looking at, okay, you've got your currently the Cove Bay water system's using 200,000 cubic meters per year. We look at some growth scenarios encompassing a number of the developments that we know about, Grafton Lakes, the Parkview Slopes, densification within the Cove area. We expect that to almost double. And then looking at adding Eagle Cliff and what we've called the Scarborough area, that area in between, would further increase that annual consumption. So a big question is, well, what is a sustainable supply from the Grafton Lake water source? So I'll just try and do this. This is sort of the next slide. I mentioned that there was a model that was developed that was by UBC Master's Research Program, and then Urban Systems, our consultant team, took that model and looked at some growth scenarios for Bowen or for the Cove Bay water system. So just sort of ignore the dashed lines for the moment. The top line, that's the maximum lake water level based on the current dam, and then the bottom line here is the water can't get lower than that and still supply adequate flows for environmental reasons. It's an important, the most important creek environmentally. So essentially that's the range. The green line up here is just the current level of development, and with climate change projections that would decline over time. It's really this is looking at how low is the lowest your water gets over the course of a year. So the worst case scenario for the year. And then further development in Cove Bay would reduce that level. there's greater demand, and then adding Eagle Cliff and Scarborough further reduces that. But so we're looking at, from 106 with climate change and all of our development scenarios down to 105.5. So sort of a 70 centimeter long range change. I mean, the short story is that there is a substantial capacity to use Grafton Lake as a water source for more of the island. The other important water source is I've talked about it as the West Side Aquifer, but it's really looking at the recharge areas where we have current wells in the Blue Water Park, King Edward Bay, and Bowen Bay areas. And so we had a monitoring program underway for close to a year with that where the wells were operated under controlled scenarios, and we ran through a dry period in the summer and then a recharge period in the fall. And the hydrogeologist that was working on the study for us made some assumptions about recharge in terms of the there's been a number of studies done on Gulf Islands on groundwater recharge that show that about 10 to 45% of the rainfall recharges the aquifer. So we take the lowest end of that assumption. All of the assumptions were conservative going into this, as well as reductions based on climate change assumptions, and came up with some sustainable annual yield numbers for those aquifers, for those recharge areas. It does show that, and these are the sustainable yield estimates for each of the wells in the system. In the long term, we probably would need some additional well capacity, and it's not equally distributed. So some of the solutions we've been looking at do involve optimizing the existing wells and sharing water. I guess the main, I missed something here. Let me go back up to the groundwater sources. So yeah, essentially that 82,000 number was those recharge areas that I was showing you. It's about twice as much as the existing annual demand. And in the future, we'd expect the demand to get a lot closer to that, that conservative estimate of annual yield. There is a need for, I'll go back down here now. There is a need for well upgrades to accommodate future demand, and probably additional wells, because you're looking at, for well demand, also what's the maximum day demand. But the key point is that we do have a strong water source that we've looked at in relation to our future demand, and that provides a level of comfort in that source. So that's sort of the overview of the current status of our assessment of those key water sources. We also need to look at the Tunstall Bay aquifer, and also Honeymoon Lake, in terms of the similar questions around sustainable yield and future demand. So that's all I had. If there's any questions about that, we can get into that.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I have a couple of questions about the West Side Aquifer. You referred to comparing it to some in the Gulf Islands, and I know the geology is quite different in the Gulf Islands than here. Lots of sandstone and limestone in the Gulf Islands, and we're kind of fractured granite. So can you really use the Gulf Islands as a model for making some assumptions on what's going on in the west side aquifer?
It's not the only source of information.
Yeah.
That's one of the big assumptions that the hydrogeologists, the professionals, have to come up with. And like I mentioned, the range of assumptions or of recharge rates that were used in the Gulf Island studies was from 10% of the rainfall going back to aquifer recharge up to 45%. And so it's probably the reason why the hydrogeologists recommended using the lowest end of that range. So we've only assumed that 10% of the rainfall is contributing to the aquifer recharge, and it's probably more than that, and that's been the
being conservative.
But you're right, the conditions are different.
Yep.
And if we had very similar conditions, then the assumption may be less conservative. We may be able to assume something higher. The other thing they looked at was there's a climate station at Sunset Beach, the island, and it shows substantially less rainfall than the Vancouver Airport station. So that data was used, and then there's something on the order of a 10% reduction over time in the rainfall in the key times of the year that matter for recharge. So that's been further reduced by 10%. So.
One final question before I open it to others. Talking about Grafton Lake water levels, one of the charges that our group has is to make sure that there's adequate water supply for nature, and I know that there's extensive wetlands around Grafton Lake, and they're dependent on fairly high water levels before they start drying out, and the whole ecology of the wetland changes. So have you been looking at that feature there too? And again, the value of the wetland that I understand is that it contributes heavily to improving water quality in a lake. Adjacent water wetlands do a lot of water purification there. So just a question there.
Yeah, that is something that needs to be investigated further. If you're drawing more water from the lake, you would expect some greater fluctuations in water levels, and maybe the water level range that I showed earlier it's not a huge range. It's that the fluctuations aren't that big, but it's still needs to be. They are bigger than they were. They will be bigger than they were, and so the impact of that on the ecology of the lake is, of course, important. So really, and I was trying to get support for this from the water system LACs, and it relates to the island-wide master plan. That's been difficult. There's a real tendency to focus on the immediate problems, and we can't afford to spend money on that type of planning at this time. But really, we should be looking at Grafton Lake watershed in terms of the ecological importance of the lake and the water courses that drain in and out of the lake, the water supply requirements now and in the future, the land development issues, the recreation issues, All of these things should be part of an integrated watershed plan.
Yep.
It's really, it's impossible to just consider the wetland without considering it alongside the water demand. So I think that's something that we need to do, in terms of our constraints on staff time and resources and, general difficulty in getting broad support for that. Those are all the challenges moving that forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from Maureen has her hand up?
Thanks a lot, Patrick, for the presentation. On one of the slides, you showed the evergreen lands, and you noted that the consumption at evergreen is roughly half of what it might otherwise be expected because of the covenant requiring rainwater capture.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, and I probably should know this, is that same covenant on phase 2 and phase 3 of evergreen?
I believe so. I
Okay.
believe it is.
And what about Grafton?
Not as far as I know. No, I don't think.
Daniel, are you still with us?
I agree with Patrick. I believe it is for evergreen and it is not for Grafton.
But it is, I think 50% is even conservative, and those aren't municipal systems. That was another conservative assumption, is that we've included those areas.
Yeah.
But I know Glenn, who's working with us on the water systems, has a place in Evergreen and monitors his well consumption and rainwater consumption, and rarely uses the wells for a sort of I can't remember the percentage, but a small percentage of the overall use is from wells, and it's mostly rainwater. So
I guess it's just drawing to our attention the importance of that kind of covenant on.
Well, yeah, and the a covenant like that can dramatically improve demand management for groundwater sources or surface water.
So from the perspective of an Environment and Climate Action Committee, that might be important feedback to give to council in terms of future planning on island. Now, if it's making that big a difference, and we're dealing with challenges in some areas of undersupply of water, or having to overbuild because people are consuming at a higher rate than they might otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think Don had a question in the chat, Will.
Oh, thanks. Don, can you reiterate what you saw, what you put in the chat?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Yes?
Can hear you, but it's quiet.
Oh, is that better?
Only mildly.
Yeah, my question's in the chat, so.
So he was asking, is there a tipping point? Sorry. Patrick, is there a tipping point of how many, is there a number?
Is there a number? Probably is the number out there somewhere. I think the work that we were doing on the looking at the sustainability of the water sources one of the big reasons for that is to give us confidence that we wouldn't be crossing that kind of tipping point with the development that's been planned. And that's.
So how many people can live on Bowen?
There's capacity for to supply water to substantially more people than we currently have.
Okay, could you repeat that?
And we haven't even, I haven't talked about, Killarney Lake at all, the biggest lake on the island, right? I mean, there's, some of the Gulf Islands or even the Sunshine Coast we're in a much better situation in terms of possible water source, current and potential future water sources.
Any chance my microphone's working now?
Yeah.
Yay.
It's embarrassing. No, I'm very happy. It was a great report. I thought it was a test to have to read 300 or 400 pages last night, but incredibly well done. And my concern has always been, how much development can the island sustain, and with regards to natural resources. And I think you've done an excellent job getting us a lot closer, feeling a lot more comfortable about capacities a long way off.
Yeah, I think we're not done, but that's, we really should have an island-wide master plan that looks at everything, and then we're working towards that.
Yeah, I hope we can help encourage that.
Yeah.
And any more questions from other folks?
See 2 hands up, but they might be old news.
Yeah. David is oh, he's on the phone now.
I don't know.
Well, I'm wondering about the master plan. One feature I think is really important to look at is the importance of the forest on the crown lands and on private land for maintaining the recharge areas. There's lots of studies out there showing that you take the forest off a mountain and you lose a lot of the freshwater capacity, both groundwater and surface water. So we're vulnerable to climate change, and it's both the change in the forest cover from that directly or from increased possibility of a fire. So I'm really pleased to hear you talking about the need for a master plan. I see Michaela's got her hand up.
I would also suggest to dovetail into that, the change in water supply based on the change in vegetation. So we're talking about the fluctuations around Grafton Lake that will cause a shift in vegetation. It may not be wetland vegetation, but it will make it more susceptible for invasive species to come in, like yellow flag, which the water consumption for yellow flag is a lot higher than the hardhack wetland vegetation that's currently there. And so with the shift from native to invasive species, that might change the tipping point for those surface water, the surface water availability. And I think that needs to be included in the overall plan, as well as possibly some plan for invasive species removal or control, or however that looks.
Yeah, I think invasive species control, preventing impacts of invasive species like yellow flag is extremely important, part of long-term planning, making sure that we're considering that. In terms of how much it affects the water balance is probably very small when you're looking at about a 300 hectare watershed area. That it's really, I think, like William was saying, the changes, potential changes in that larger watershed that would have the bigger impact on water balance and supply than the vegetation around the fringe of the lake. But important invasive species are important consideration for other reasons, of course.
Any more questions? David.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Sorry, I was on the phone, had to take that call. I just wanted to thank Patrick for a couple of reasons here. This work is super important. I mean, we all see the importance, obviously, from the carrying capacity idea and so on. So it's so good to finally have a handle on this, but it's also important from a local water perspective. We've got on Bowen, we've got a lot of local water committees that have been set up many, many years ago, and they didn't have access to detailed engineering and money and data. And so it's really important from just the social sustainability, the ability to provide necessary resources. this one water to our community, that Patrick's done this work. So it's really great. Thanks, Patrick. The other thing that I really appreciate, Patrick, is you're looking at things in an integrated way, understanding that water isn't just for folks to drink or water their gardens, but it's also that an important underpinning for the rest of the life on the island. And then the third thing is a number I hadn't heard before, that assuming that 10% of rainfall is aquifer recharge. That's really interesting. And to Maureen's point about, you know, what they're already doing at Evergreen, that we know that we're going to have more water on Bowen in the future. It's just going to be pouring down in the winter. And so the issue is storage. And so moving towards requiring new developments to store water is hugely important. So anyway, thanks for this, and thanks for all the comments, folks.
Bonnie.
Yeah, and just, you know, really wanting to sort of look at improving food security on Bowen as well. So regenerative agriculture practices and backyard sharing, whatever that be, for gardens, and to reduce our transportation, ultimately, you know, reduce some transportation emissions. So that requires water or water storage as well. So just another point, because I think that's something that's coming up in the comments. You know, there's lots to talk about regenerative agriculture practices and improving food security on Bowen. Involves water.
I've got another question, and it might be premature. The consultant reports make some recommendations. How do you feel about those recommendations? Are they doable, or are there other options that must be considered?
There's, of course, there are other options. That I think we've been working closely with them. So the recommendations that have been put forward are shared recommendations, and not everybody is going to agree with all of them, and that's why the consultation with the LACs is a significant part of this. And then that will be brought to council as well, and potentially be shared with other committees. It's particularly when you're talking about merging water systems. We've got a newer system in King Edward Bay where there's some apprehension about being linked to an older system. So you have to work through all of that still.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation and sharing those reports with us. Very helpful and very useful to our understanding of the situation.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick.
I have to leave. Sorry.
So I guess we'll move on to business arising from the minutes.
So the work plan was the wrong link. Sorry about that. David's report was so good, I had to send it twice. But I can share the work plan here. Sorry, Bonnie, go ahead.
That's great stuff. If you could save or show the work plan, that's wonderful. And yeah, I'm just open to comments. I'd like to get it to council as soon as possible for information. As far as we've identified thus far, there's no direct budget implications. Yeah. So, I mean, I could go through it. I just know time-wise, I know our staff event starts fairly soon, and staff is key in that staff event. Do you want to go through it? Has everybody had a chance to look at it? There's one thing that might be missing, Michaela, I know you're here, so I know you've talked about conservation banking or, some sort of banking of tree loss or accounting for tree loss. That's something that I anticipate will be part of the SEEP update as an implementation item. That's will be included there. So I haven't explicitly listed it, I don't believe. But is there any other comments or additions or deletions that anybody sees?
Well, but Bonnie, first of all, I think it looks great. I really like the way it's set up. I like the listing of the objectives and the other things. Under the first objective, the only thing I'd add in the first column is maybe that ensure that we include examination of adequate supply of water for nature in all our referrals. Again, a strong view, lightly held, so I can be easily dissuaded if you think that's covered elsewhere or.
Yeah, so I think we have, review of guidelines, policies, bylaws, and as as directed by council to assist, review different development proposals. So I would assume that might maybe fit under there, or it would just be implicit in our environmental comments. I'm open to suggestions there, though. If we want it, listed somewhere, I might find where it fits. It could fit under irrigation. Yeah.
Sure. If you see a spot, or I think it is fairly well understood, but just want to make sure that it's something we make sure we think about strongly.
Yeah, and also too, I just wanted to state one thing is that I will be removing the pesticide reference. There is a reference to, as directed by council, assist staff with creation of Bowen Island pesticide regulations. That's just under the environmental protection banner. Yep. And just that council did not resolve to move forward with that at this time. But again, it may come up as a possible implementation item in future years in the CEAP or in our climate change program or strategy initiatives.
No, that's not quite true.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. I thought that was, maybe you could speak to that then. That was my understanding.
Yeah, we'll get to that when we come down to the stuff from council.
Okay.
But there's no, council wants to move forward on that.
Oh, okay. That's not okay.
Need help.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that clarity.
Any other comments from committee members?
I can't see Michaela again. Is it me? Anyone else see her?
I'm stuck with looking at the screen.
Okay.
And the speaker.
I don't see her. No.
No.
Okay.
I think it looks good, Bonnie. Is there anything else that you want to draw our attention to, or have you done that for what you thought?
I think those are the points that I see, but I love your eyes on it as well.
Yeah.
Just for.
Would you like us to have a more detailed or second review and provide comments, or would you like us to approve this today to get it to council at next meeting?
I mean, ideally, it would be great to get it to council for information. We're in February now. It would be nice, but we could, if you wanted to go back and look at it and fluff it up a bit or remove some items, and we could revisit it at our next meeting. What do the councillors feel about that?
I think perhaps the next meeting, and that comes from not being quite sure about the sequencing of some of these. I mean, for many of the points, they're ongoing, dealing with referrals and so forth. But when as a work plan ordinarily in my experience, leads to something specific, or it's phased, or it gives you more of a sense of timeline. And I'm not getting that from this work plan. So the general areas and some of the specifics are identified, but the when isn't clear to me, Bonnie.
And I agree with that. I agree with Maureen's position. It's not, it doesn't look so much like a work plan of stuff we'll actually get down and start digging our, you know, getting into doing. Some of these things are sort of watching briefs, whereas others are, there are some things we actually need to get going on. Yeah, so let's give it a little bit more time, perhaps.
And the second thing that I like to see is I'd like to see more explicit connection to our climate action strategy.
Yeah.
To actually have that referenced in this document, because we have an adopted climate action strategy. Presumably the climate action committee should be working towards realizing at least some of the small wins that were identified in that plan.
Yeah.
So I think just a fresh look might be needed here.
Mm-hmm. That would be great. And I can add another column for timelines. Yeah, for sure. And also tease out some of the smaller items from the climate action strategy. That would be fantastic. Yeah, I can do that. We can revisit it next meeting. That'd be good.
Oh, and we received regrets from Michaela by email. I don't know if you missed. Her battery ran out.
Oh,
all right.
Thank you.
To updates then.
Yep, updates we're at. Bonnie?
Oh, I just wanted to read out, I don't know if everybody's aware, but at the January 25th, 2021 regular council meeting, council resolved to direct staff to submit an application for the grant funding for the on-island compost facility through the provincial Clean BC grant, and that council supports the project and confirms its intention to fund its 1/3 share, which is calculated to be approximately $500,000, with $100,000 coming from NICNAC Nook grant, which I spoke with NICNAC Nook yesterday.
Wow.
They're very generous. I mean, it's amazing. They've been so supportive of this project for so many years. So yeah, so that grant application has been submitted, and we now wait, and we hope to hear from the province by late spring, early summer.
Great.
And I thank Carla very much for her work on that grant.
Thanks, Carla. All right. So, Councillor Hocking.
There, yeah, and Maureen and I can just talk about this. So on the pesticide ban, the worry from, first of all, council liked the idea of a pesticide ban. They were fully supportive, but the worry was the staff time right now. Staff have got a lot of stuff to do, and they don't have a whole lot of time to come up with proposed bylaws. And so it got sent back to this committee for us to have a little subcommittee perhaps to sit down and produce something that give council some options. Like for example, I mentioned rodenticide, and you know, that wouldn't be included in some pesticide bans. A pesticide ban that was, you know, then there's the issue of agriculture. Should that be part of it or not? So we need to bring back a report to council with a couple of options. You know, here's what this municipality has done. Here's what this municipality has done. This is the most stringent option, and this is a more moderate, and so on. So we need someone to take a little bit of time. I'm happy to spend time on that, but we need a couple others perhaps. Bonnie, not you, your staff. You're not supposed to do this.
Yeah, I certainly would join in on that.
Okay. Maureen?
Maureen?
Suggestion from, and Steph, rein me in if I'm going in the wrong direction here.
I would-
In the Community Economic Development Committee, we have various working groups that are report back to the committee. But those working groups always, pretty near always, include members of the community who have a strong interest, but who do not serve on the committee itself. So it's a way of informing the committee's work and also reducing the amount of work on the part of the individual committee members. Folks that are involved with the Food Resilience Society, Bowen in Transition, Phil Gregory. I mean, I think that they would be all over this if they knew that there was a window where council is happy to consider, suggestions towards a bylaw, if that's where we're going.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Phil would be terrific, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I guess too that, just determining the scope, because I know that the food resiliency folks kind of lump pesticides into a big bundle, but really other municipalities have partitioned rodenticide bans out and cosmetic herbicide bans. So they've sort of had tiered approaches to different aspects of chemicals in the environment.
Yeah, so how do we, those are all good points. How do we proceed?
Well,
Don, want to say something?
No, I'm just happy to tag along and happy to help where I can.
Okay, that's great.
What I'll do is I'm going to put it in the work plan
Okay.
and
Yeah,
come
right.
back.
A cunning move, yes.
Good.
Yes,
Okay.
excellent move.
Oh, and then Michaela may be interested as well. So would there be some kind of call out then, or would the councillors want to?
Well, we'll put it in the work plan. We can discuss it next time, and that probably will be one of the points in our list of activities associated with the initiative.
Perfect.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. One other thing from council then that I would just like to mention is that we had we had a process to look into the first phase of the multi-use path, and we've had responses to that by potential constructors or companies who could do that, and probably that will be there'll be a contract out anytime in the next few days. And I just got contract out in the next few days, and you'll see construction starting.
Excellent. It's great news.
Yeah, there's a deadline of the end of March for one of the grants that we had. I think it was a Bike BC grant. And so, we got to get a bunch of work done before the end of March.
Yep. All right. So thank you, David. Next meeting.
So it looks like we've got a lot of items for the next meeting. You guys are busy. I poll.
Okay, you will do a poll and we'll get that underway. Thank you, Steph. And so I'm going to move we adjourn.
Okay.
Thank you. Great
Thanks,
meeting.
everybody. Great to see everybody.
Yeah.
Good meeting.
Thanks, Will.